Good afternoon. Welcome to the Innovate Industry Spotlight Series. My name is Ahmad Nassef, and I'm the Training, Outreach, and Networking Manager at Innovate. I'm very delighted to be introducing our guest speakers today, Frédéric Couet, the artificial intelligence designer and R&D engineer at OpSens Medical, and Daniel Zikovits, GE Healthcare's Canadian ambassador for AI and digital technologies. Daniel and Frédéric will be discussing how they are collaborating in designing novel products for interventional cardiovascular procedures. But before getting into the specifics of today's lecture, a quick background on this series for those who are joining us for the first time. The Innovate Industry Spotlight Series is a monthly series featuring interactive discussions with Innovate industry members, and those sessions are themed around various applications and clinical domains within the image guide therapy and AI sectors. The event takes place on the last Thursday of every month, where we invite an Innovate industry member to present and showcase their technology, commercialization journey, and milestones. The event consists of a 45-minute talk, which is followed by 10 to 15 minutes Q&A. This event is being recorded and will be available for later viewing with French subtitles. Please note that by joining this event, you agree to be recorded and that Sunnybrook and the Innovate Network may use the recording, which might include your image, voice, or name for educational purposes. Given that this is a Zoom meeting, you are still able to turn off your camera and mute your audio, but your name might still appear in the recording. Please make sure to mute yourselves while the presentation is in progress to avoid any background noise or distraction to our presenters. If you have any question for our speakers, please use the raise your hand button or feel free to post your question in the Q&A chat. If these events are of interest, and we hope they are, please do not forget to subscribe to our e-newsletter, which is accessible through our website, innovate.ca. Due to the Canadian anti-spam legislation, we cannot send you future emails about upcoming events unless you have signed up for our e-newsletter and have given us consent to communicate with you. Finally, I would like to note that this series, as well as the Innovate Network, are proudly supported by the Federal Government of Canada through the Strategic Innovation Fund program. Shifting gears to today's session. So today we'll learn how OpSens Medical is combining imaging and pressure guide wires to design new products for percutaneous coronary interventions and transcatheter aortic valve implantations. Our discussion topics today will include how machine learning and artificial intelligence are being used in the design of medical technologies, how data is being labeled, curated, and versioned, and how OpSens is working together with GE to follow regulatory frameworks, and how they're dealing with some of the challenges associated with AI and machine learning, such as dealing with conceptual drift. So a little bit about our speakers. Frédéric Couet is a physical engineer who studied in the field of biomaterials and tissue engineering. In the past 10 years, he has done many data science projects for industrial and medical applications. At OpSens Medical, he leads projects involving fluid mechanics, machine learning, and medical imaging. Daniel Zikovits is GE Healthcare's Canadian ambassador for AI and digital technologies. Daniel works with academic, research, clinical, and startup partners to shape strategies for the next generation of solutions towards improved healthcare delivery. He's also an advisory board member for the Ontario Brain Institute. Prior to joining GE Healthcare, he has worked with Visual 8 and Point Click Care, where he was advancing complex solutions to improve healthcare using big data, analytics, cloud computing, modeling, and simulation. Daniel received his PhD in computer science and neurology from York University's Center for Vision Research and has held several faculty positions in biology, psychology, computer sciences, and has recently given platform presentation on AI for DeGroote Executive MBA, as well as Rotman School of Business International Healthcare MBA as well. He has completed an NSERC postdoctoral fellowship at the Department of Defense in Canada and the United States and has over 50 academic publications and is a certified modeling and simulation professional. Frédéric and Daniel, thank you very much for being our guest speakers this afternoon. And without further ado, I'm passing this over to you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I'm very pleased to be here. Being interested by machine learning, I once asked a doctor, what is a representative population that he sees in a cath lab? I was wondering about conceptual drift. Are the patients changing? Are they younger? Are they older? It could be anybody, he said. One day you are walking on the street, you have an unstable plaque in your arteries, And the next thing you know, you lay on a table in the cath lab. The doctor I talked to refers to himself as a plumber. On the screens, you may see X-ray images of the coronary arteries beating and twisting with the heart and rocking with the patient's breathing. Above the image, there may be a screen showing, for example, the electrocardiogram and possibly the pressures within the coronary arteries and the aorta. The doctor may enter the patient through the femoral artery, going up through the aorta and turning in the aortic arc, stopping at the coronary ostia and injecting contrast agent to see the blood vessels on the angiograms. If there is a stenosis, then you can use a guide wire, go through the blockage, then use the wire to dilate a stent in the artery. This intervention is called PCI, for percutaneous coronary intervention. Measuring the pressure in the artery can help decide if we should put a stent or not in the patient. The FFR is the ratio of disease flow rate in the coronary artery here over the normal flow rate in the same artery. So normal. If the FFR is below 0.8, that means that the lesion contributes to a significant decrease of blood flow feeding the heart. If we assume first the venous pressure to be close to 0, and second, the disease and normal myocardial resistances to be equal, then, and also if we assume a 0D fluid mechanic model, so basically the pressure being proportional to the flow, then the FFR can be estimated to be PD over PA, the distal pressure over the aortic pressure. The left figure here shows how FFR measurements correlate with major adverse cardiac events such as stroke, myocardial infarction, and cardiovascular death. The right figure shows that if the FFR is lower than a certain threshold, here 0.8, the doctor should put a stent. If this is higher though, then it is probably better to use another form of medical therapy because the benefits won't surpass the risks. The FAME study compared angiography-guided PCI and FFR-guided PCI. We know that guiding PCI with angiography alone may be misleading. When there is a doubt, the guidelines suggest to use the FFR measurements. But let's consider both approaches. Opsens develops a unique optical technology that allows to measure pressure very accurately and without significant drift for a long period of time. This is useful for applications such as ventricular assist devices, for example, where the sensor can be used for weeks. Because the sensor is also based on interferometry, we can disconnect and reconnect the sensor still without experiencing significant drift. So it is useful for applications such as PCI and valve replacement like TAVI, for example. We distribute this sensor in many geographic markets, including the United States, Canada, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Japan. Without going into too much details, we have a Fabry-Perot sensor at the end of an optical fiber. Part of the light will be reflected by this dielectric mirror, and part of the light will be reflected by a thin diaphragm that can be deformed by the external pressure. So we can process the difference in the two path length and calculate the pressure. Building this sensor is Opsens' superpower. Now, Innovate is a network for image-guided therapy, so let's talk about images. There are two major trends right now for image-guided coronary physiology. The first one is the more ambitious, so CT-derived FFR, here on the left, attempts to develop a fully non-invasive solution using computed tomography and computational fluid dynamics. So let's see the workflow very quickly. Based on computed tomography angiography, or CTA, the main branch of the coronary artery is reconstructed and then meshed. We apply boundary conditions based on some hypothesis about the patient. Then we can simulate the flow during hyperemia in the blood vessels and with and without the stenosis. A few hours in a cloud computing infrastructures and you get your virtual FFR. The second image-guided solution is the angiography-derived FFR. This time, the patient is on the cath lab, and we have a catheter all the way up to the coronaries. Contrast agent is injected in the vessel, then using at least 2 images, the 3D geometry can be reconstructed, and again, boundary conditions are estimated, and CFD is done to estimate the FFR like in the FFRCT. Neither of the two solutions is perfect. On the left figure, you can see the FFRCT trying to predict FFR measured with a pressure sensor. And on the right figure, you can see the FFR angio here written as QFR, also trying to reach the accuracy of FFR. As we are improving the models, we are trying to get closer and closer to the invasive pressure measurements. So we are trying to move this line up. Our Innovate project takes a different approach. We ask ourselves, how could we be even better than the FFR by combining both methods? FFR is a very high-level abstraction. A single number is used to summarize the state of the whole cardiovascular system relevant for PCI. So surely the doctor considers the FFR in context with the angiograms and the patient's history. Our decision support tool should be at the same level the doctor's thinking is happening, combining pressure and images with data-driven algorithms to answer questions like, should I put a stent or use medical therapy? If I use a stent, what dimension should it be? Where should I put it? What kind of follow-up should I do? Is my patient at risk? So if we succeed combining image and pressure, I think it could impact lives. This video shows when the doctor injects the contrast agent. At the right moment, we can capture a good image of the coronary arteries, revealing their geometry. I will call this image the reference angio. When we use the FFR, we are making a lot of hypotheses. Since we are on this video, observe that we can see the blood flow. Maybe not well enough to measure it precisely, but it is still more than measuring only pressure, possibly enough to check some of our hypotheses. On this video, you can see the tip of our pressure guide wire here, moving with the blood vessel as the doctor slowly pulls back. The objective is to capture pressure measurements along the blood vessel and answer some of the questions the doctor asks himself. What dimension should be the stent, or where should I put it? Tracking the tip of the wire to be able to map pressure measurements on our reference angio is called co-registration. We are developing a product around this idea. I will be using this example in the presentation to talk about machine learning. Without sharing too much details about a specific co-registration solution, what is important to understand is that it aims to help decide the length and position of the stent or stents. And technically, it requires to be able to track the tip of the guide wire and to estimate the pressure as a function of time and space. We spent a lot of time developing our tip tracking technology. Interestingly, our engineers use the traditional programming paradigm, yet developed somehow in a compatible way for machine learning. They built a database of examples with angiograms and tip positions. Then they wrote a program to locate the tip, ran the database, and output tip position and therefore performance metrics. After analysis, the programmer would improve the program, usually based on adding steps, adding functionalities. It would also optimize the process by tuning the parameters for filtering, branching, blurring. The resulting algorithm became complex and maybe harder to improve. Which brings me to the first and third rules of machine learning, according to Google. First rule, don't. So we didn't start with machine learning. First, we considered a simpler approach without machine learning. Our solution grew into a complex algorithm, so we chose machine learning over a complex heuristic. So we started a small side project trying to evaluate the machine learning approach. Instead of having a software engineer here writing the program, we only feed the system with angiograms as inputs and tip positions as outputs. The product of our machine learning pipeline is a small program or a model that accepts an angiography as input and will output the position, the tip position. But instead of working on the program here, we will have to focus our effort on the machine learning pipeline. So we are trading complexity in the algorithm for complexity in the infrastructure. We are willing to make this trade because on the long term, we think that we will be able to reach better performances than with traditional software. Apart from tip tracking, there are many other tasks between putting a pressure sensor in the arteries and providing the doctors with useful insights. Segmenting the coronary arteries from the background without capturing the catheter or brushers could be another task learned by examples. I like to use this animation to show the basic ideas of learning from examples. This could also be seen as the simplest of an example of a data-centric pipeline, which is quite trendy right now. In this short animation, we never change the model. We simply improve our data set where the model is making the worst predictions. We have quickly discussed the pros. Now let's discuss the cost. Although sometimes machine learning is the simplest solution to a difficult problem, it comes with some constraints. Among them, the FDA and other regulatory organizations will require us to demonstrate good machine learning practices, a culture of organizational excellence, algorithm change protocols, and real-world performance monitoring. So let's start with good machine learning practices and model training and tuning. On the topic of model training, I like this figure, which covers many important points. In our tip tracking example, we have roughly 15,000 examples, labeled images extract from anonymized DICOM or multiple patients in different hospital centers. So we are not pre-processing these images in a significant way, but the images are split in a training and a test data set with roughly 20% of the images. Seems good, right? But it's easy to forget that the images are related. They could come from the same patient, they could come from the same X-ray machines and be correlated in time. So in the future, we should use a stratified data sampling strategy to ensure that we don't only test by showing new images to the algorithm, but also by showing new patients and new X-ray machines. I have never seen a data scientist train a model once, then say, all good, let's deploy. usually we try different learning parameters or model. We try to optimize the model. So this is the hyperparameter box here. If we try our algorithms on the whole training data set, then we will only find the parameters overfitting the most. Therefore, we need cross-validation here. So again, just like in the training and test data set, we will split the training data set so we can make experiments and estimate how well the new model should perform on new data. For the performance metrics, we will try to minimize the square distance between the predicted position of the tip and the true position of the tip. We should also link this performance metric with the business objective. Here, the doctor needs to choose a stent by increments of 2 millimeters. So if we could locate the tip within roughly 1 millimeter of the true value, then we could reasonably expect the doctor to have the right information to size the stent and position it correctly. As you can see, we still here have some improvement to do. Back to the FDA and our good machine learning practices. So when training a model, most of us learned early to version our code and to set our random seed so we can reproduce our results. But then comes a moment when you face a real world problem where you basically iterate acquiring data and modeling, and you realize this is a mess. And you cannot reproduce your whole results because your data has changed or your environment has changed, or maybe even you are not in the same computer anymore. So let's talk about data selection and management. Machine learning projects involve code, data configuration and data and configurations. So you need all three to reproducibly train a model. Software engineers have been versioning their code and configuration files for a few decades now, but versioning the data set is a more recent idea. At Opsens, we version our code using Git, and we version our data using DVC, which stands for Data Version Control. DVC will create and track small hash files, which are unique and are committed with the code, while the large data files are pushed into a data storage solution. With this little trick, we can link the code, and model versions. We can ensure that at any time we are able to revert to a previous version of our model and retrain it if required. You may look at this figure and ask yourself, should I go with GitHub or GitLab? Should I use S3 or maybe Google Cloud? You can spend a lot of time weighing these options. Today at Opsens, we are using GitHub and S3, but really it may not be that important. In my opinion, they are all good products that will give you the same chances to succeed. The Fredkin's paradox states that the closer two alternatives are, the longer it takes to decide, although the smaller difference it makes. So you may be better spending your brain power on different parts of your company or your product. Still in the data department, we may have tons of images. If you want to teach the machine a task such as tip tracking, you need to associate the image with a label, an output you want your algorithm to produce. We are using Label Studio to annotate our images. Label Studio allows us to create a user interface for key point detection, tracking the tip, and for semantic segmentation, identifying if a pixel is a coronary artery or background, for example. It also allows us to run our current model version to either pre-label our images before human inspection or to recommend the most important images to label, those that will improve our model most. On the left figure here, you can see a part of the user interface for semantic segmentation. On the right figure, you can see how we can simply connect a machine learning backend here by implementing a fit and a predict function. Doing that after labeling images, you can trigger the model training and the new trained model can make predictions, for example, placing a key point on the next image to label. We can also connect Label Studio with S3, our S3 bucket, and synchronize the images and the annotations in the cloud. Another concern we may have when developing a software as medical device is the pre-market submission. This would be a word to cover, our example being in the early stage. I just want to quickly touch 1 or 2 points. First, managing the software bills of materials. Although we are quite early in the development process, we still pay attention to this traceability matter. Traditionally at Upsounds, we are using a virtual machine to build and test our software. For this project, though, we are using Docker containers to build our app dependencies layer by layer. One of the differences between virtual machines and containers is that virtual machines includes a complete OS with some low-level functions, while containers only contain high-level system APIs, the applications and its dependencies. There are 3 motivations for us to work with containers. First, containers are built using a configuration file. So one file is enough to build in a reproducible way a whole operating system to run our application. Second, because they are lightweight, containers can be launched quickly to run tests. So they are perfect for continuous integration. And third, containers are a good way to package our application for production and run it in the cloud or on a partner's infrastructure. Here is an example of what could a Docker file look like. This is for development. So without any security check or optimization, we just start from an official Docker image. This comes from a curated set of high quality images, but they are not security vetted. This image is perfect for development, but it's not what we would put into a final product. We then copy the dependencies of our app in the container, then we can install them. Requirements.txt file could look something like this. It is a list of all the packages and fixed versions that are used in our solution here to train our model. Most of the ingredients will be out of our software bill of materials when we come the time to push our model to production. But in the meanwhile, you can see that we use Boto3 to communicate with S3 image buckets. You can see also MLflow to manage data science experiments. You can see a bunch of image processing and machine learning libraries that we tried during the development. You can also see DVC used for versioning our dataset. So together, the requirements.txt file and the Docker file will describe the ingredients and recipe for our training pipeline and for our inference solution. For the tip tracking example, we would probably not deploy a learning algorithm. More likely, we will train, freeze, and test a solution in-house, just like for our traditional software approach. For other applications, though, we could be interested by learning on-site. Then we will probably need to define an algorithm change protocol. Basically, we need to define beforehand how and why our software will learn. This is basic best practices in decision intelligence. To avoid decision bias, you should decide before looking at the data what would be the threshold for one decision or another. For your learning algorithm here, you should determine what will be the criteria to change the model and how it will be done. They say culture is strategy for breakfast, and I really believe in the bottom-up emergent impact of culture, but it's ironic though, because I really felt the idea of a culture of quality surge for me when I was finally able to put it in small boxes, basically when I discovered DORA. DORA stands for DevOps Research and Assessment. It is based on surveying over 32,000 people for 7 years. It is supported by Google and applies quantitative methods to understand the link between, for example, leadership, technical practices, culture of basically the culture and the performance for software deployment and the organization. So I use this framework. I try to use, for example, let's say superlative leadership, but or intellectual stimulation to promote technical practices. So it needs to focus on those technical practices like test automation and continuous integration, so that we move toward continuous delivery and to improve our performances and even job satisfaction. I guess the lesson here is that automated tests are also for ML project and they will make you happy. So moving over to our next concern, real-world performance monitoring. Being a little further in the process, we have not focused on this element yet. Although we already have a way to capture feature requests or complaints from clients and loop that in our design process, I think performance monitoring for AI should be a more online, almost real-time experience, where we would be able to compare predictions with true labels, true time to detect conceptual drifts. I see two possibilities around this idea. One way would require us to have connected monitors. This would create multiple major opportunities for us, but it comes with a lot of social, legal, and technical challenges, mainly around cybersecurity. Another way would be to leverage some sort of platform, maybe developed by another company. We could use the platform to enable secure communications to monitor our models. It could also be used to compose more complicated workflow, maybe also involving third parties. So let's take the following example. Opsens will soon be launching a new guide wire for TAVI that has an integrated pressure sensor. The pre-shaped wire will be placed within the left ventricle and will allow the physician to deliver the valve, to provide rapid pacing, and to measure the pressure gradient caused by the faulty valve or on the newly implanted valve. After the intervention, the physician will be able to see the new pressure measurement and verify that there is no more gradient. You can see the pressure signal in the ventricle on the blue, in blue, and in the aorta in red. The yellow region here basically is a consequence of a backflow in the ventricle. It is a sign of a diseased valve. Maybe we need to install a new one, or maybe it is the new valve and we need to make some adjustments to the intervention. So these pressure measurements are full of information. The intervention validations currently are done using imaging, maybe using X-ray or echo. Now, imagine a workflow where imaging and pressure measurements can be combined to provide a more accurate prognostic after the intervention. We could put Opsens containers, calculating pressure-based indicators in the same infrastructure as maybe GE or Siemens algorithms to analyze a DICOM study of the intervention. So we started pretty abstract, a single number representing the whole cardiovascular state of a patient relevant for PCI. We talk about artificial intelligence, maybe the biggest umbrella word in science, good machine learning practices, and organizational excellence. When I say these words, I feel like a team captain telling my teammates to play well. But then we went down the ladder of abstraction. What are the decisions? What are the machine learning tasks? What are these best practices? And down again to the tools and the way we are using them to enforce reproducible science and develop robust software solutions that may impact lives. The whole project is very exciting. Thanks to Innovate's support, we are making a lot of progress. We are also very well supported by our partner ATI with experts in medical imaging and also artificial intelligence. They are the ones who did the tip tracking model with us. I talked a lot about the development phase, but there is another very important aspect to the process, and it is the deployment phase. Although Opsens has deployed software as medical devices, we have done it mostly alone. I felt that in the spirit of the talk and of the Innovates network, it would be interesting and valuable to grasp a little bit more about this platform idea to collaborate. So when you say words like one last thing, you know something great is coming. So that's why I would like, for the end of the presentation, to give the floor to Daniel Zikovitz from GE Healthcare.
Thank you, Frederick. I'm just going to share my screen here. And hopefully you can see my screen okay. So thanks for joining this afternoon, everybody. I think this is an awesome topic, and I want to zoom out and I want to zoom back in is what is kind of the way I'm going to handle my presentation. So I want to start with the patient. A lot of this, we talk about machine learning and we talk about, platforms, we talk about best practices, and those are super important to get to where we need to go. But I'd like to start with the patient because I think that's where we really need to go. And right now we know within the Canadian landscape, but this is true globally from a lot of the customers and folks that we work with at GE, is that healthcare is being stretched. And I love this. This was a recent article from 2022, and this is actually an MR machine that's at Sunnybrook. But the point of this, and I think we're hearing this, globally, is really there's backlogs in things like radiology exams and surgery backlogs, and we're trying to figure out how do we catch up? How do we get to where we need to go? We have a fixed number of resources. We can start adding resources in terms of people and medical equipment, but it's going to take time to do that. But what we see is there's a huge opportunity for AI. And I love the stuff that we just went through in terms of image-guided therapy and Opsens, and GE starting to work with a whole bunch of different startups worldwide to look at how we can deploy and actually build AI at scale, because I think there's AI gives us an opportunity to deliver care in ways that we had never even imagined previously. But let's be honest, when we went through Frederick's presentation, it's not simple. There's some complexity involved. We know that, so this is a little bit, this study's getting a bit old, but I mean, it just brings the point that we can be more efficient in some cases, save costs using AI. And this is not generally, I'm not saying you're going to save you're not going to be 41% more efficient using AI for everything. But this is just an example that we know that it can work and it can help us. But it's complex, and we need these good machine learning practices. And you can start to think about, imagine we're in a world where there's people speak different languages. There's going to be different academics and different stakeholders, and they've got different ways of doing things. And what we're seeing initially, about a year or two ago, was many people using different tools. And so they're now following best practices, and there's different tool sets, and then there's different types of models being built. That the complexity is, how do we deploy these? And this is where it gets difficult to, make sure that if your model has a certain confidence interval for its accuracy, how do we compare that to another model that has the same accuracy? And so we started to build a set of different tools we realized there's two major sets of users here, or two sets of stakeholders. One are the folks that want to build AI, and those are very different from users that want to deploy AI. And so when we're working with academic researchers and different third-party startup companies, we think, what we're seeing is this potential tsunami of AI coming in. Although there's going to be some things such as regulatory that's going to slow this down, but we're starting to see changes in the way both Health Canada and FDA are looking at these. So we put together a set of tools. I'm going to touch just really quickly on some of these, like AI Workbench, Imaging Fabric. I want to talk about our developer and accelerator programs that we're using. And then I'm going to quickly just end out with a deployment tool, which is really just our orchestrator. But you can see there's a whole range of tools that you need to support machine learning and the deployment of that. And it is complex, right? So and some of the stuff that Frédéric talked about, it is complex. How do we get the data? How do we do things like annotations? How do we, in some cases, to give you an example, we did a project where we're looking at pneumothorax, for example, and we used 156,000 images from one hospital in Canada. And then we had data sets in the US, India, France, and other parts of the world. So steps 1 and 2 on this map are probably 80% of the lift, believe it or not. And then the other 20% is, where we bring in the data scientists to start, building the models and running the experiments and training phase of the AI to get to where we can actually publish a model. And then we have to have inferencing services that, so I always say the first mile or kilometer, since we're in Canada, the first kilometer of getting the data is usually the hardest. Annotating it, that's a really hard step. And the last mile of deploying this, right at the point of care in a clinical workflow is also really hard. And to do this at scale is going to be amazing. You can imagine trying to do multiple algorithms and multiple solutions at even just one healthcare institute. And now imagine trying to do this globally. So we created something called Edison AI Workbench. And this is a collaboration. We're the largest Amazon AWS partner for healthcare worldwide. And so we built a lot of the tools in conjunction with AWS, but we also pulled in other open source tools. So things like, that Frédéric was going through there, Python. People want to use Python, TensorFlow, and yeah, they want to use SageMaker. So why can't we have it all and use best of breed tools that are out there? And, we've got a whole bunch of brain trust coming out of universities and working in these startups. And these are the types of tools they use. So we didn't create a platform that would be a proprietary GE platform. The aim of this platform is to give folks a common set of tools, high level of compute power, storage power, the ability to interact on a cloud platform if they wanted to do a project that was worldwide, for example. And just going back to our pneumothorax project, this is a platform that allows people to log in from all the corners of the globe to actually interact, work on the data sets, train the models, test the models, and then the ultimate goal, going back to Frédéric's talk, is about Dockerization of the solution and deployment. And so there can be edge devices, hybrid cloud, as well as medical devices to get these algorithms right to the point of care is where we see some of the most important facets of this, and doing it at scale it's extremely hard. So we've created this online portal called our Edison Developer Program, which is an online portal. We're working with something like 200 different startup companies worldwide. They have something like $2 billion of venture capital funding. And we're starting to open up programs worldwide to start to attract developers and start to work with them and mentor and collaborate in some cases, how to do, faster machine learning and accelerate that machine learning to deployment. So this online portal is a really neat way to kind of get in and start to work with this developer community that's worldwide and find out what they're doing and then share best practices, because that's really, really important. And I just wanted to end with an accelerator program that we're starting here in Canada. There's gonna be an announcement shortly. It's a partnership with NextCube, which is a Silicon Valley group that works on accelerators. They had worked on a previous accelerator for the Canadian government, looking specifically at digital healthcare. So they were right in the sweet spot when we looked at these third-party companies that we could partner to deliver such a program. NextCube came up on our radar and was the ultimate winner of what we were trying to look for in terms of working with third parties. They do have access to venture capital funding, but this is really NextCube working at arm's length from GE with the startups to make sure that they have the types of capability. And if they need coaching and mentoring, we have experts from Amazon startup community, the Intel startup community, and we may pull in HP and NVIDIA as well into this. But the idea is to get these startups the types of resource and coaching, mentoring, and best practices for machine learning. In some cases, they may get onto our sandbox. We've got a cloud-based sandbox, and with the ultimate goal is to get a set of these, a small subset of these into our Edison marketplace, which is kind of like the Apple store for digital healthcare. And we're focusing on Canadian innovation, Canadian startups, and leveraging that and using that for the Canadian healthcare system, with an eye towards global deployment. And so we talked about multiple ways we could deploy, and I talked about device, on edge, on cloud, PACS. I just want to leave you with one cool thing that we've worked on, and this is a solution called the Edison AI Orchestrator, and it uses an edge compute device that can connect to PACS, or in some cases the imaging devices directly. And what it does is it connects to we've started to connect with a wide range of third-party PACS, so not just GE PACS, but obviously we're connected to GE PACS. But we've got this orchestrator system that allows the imaging to come through, and then the AI engine determines whether it has an algorithm runs the algorithm on the image or exam, and then pushes it either to the top of a work list prioritization list within the PACS, or where it can display results, so it can point out many different things. And we're starting to deploy multiple suites of algorithms, which we see as a really really interesting way to deploy AI in terms of instead of the one-offs, why not have like a whole chess suite, a whole MSK suite, a whole neuro suite, a whole cardiological suite, things like that. We think are really important to to make sure we deploy AI at scale. And so it allows you to manage the algorithms, it allows you to manage the workflow notifications, and in many cases, device management. And so I'm just going to leave it there, but I think there's an awesome opportunity, and working with Canadian startups. I think the reason we picked the Canadian Accelerator is the third program to start, behind some other countries, including Europe and India and China. But we saw Canada as a very vibrant ecosystem of startups, government support, as well as academic and brain trust in Canada. So we see this as an awesome opportunity, and we'd love to hear from anybody that knows a really good startup that would like to get into digital health. We'd be interested to hear about it. And I'll leave it there. I think we've got Q&A now, right, Ahmed?
Yes. Sorry, just one moment. Thank you very much, Frédéric and Danielle. That was excellent and a very insightful talk on some of the technological advancements in the field of minimally invasive cardiovascular procedures and the integration of AI to help guide clinical decision-making and ultimately making those procedures safer, effective, and faster in delivering optimal patient outcomes. I'd like to open it now for questions from the audience. And I can start. I do have a question, and maybe I'll address this to both you, Frédéric, and Daniel. You noted this in your presentation. In the last few years, we've seen great progress in leveraging data and technology, and there's a strong appetite to continue to build on our ability to harness the power of data and insights to support growth and value for our industry and healthcare sector members. You talked about some of the challenges, including regulation, and touched upon some of the ingredients for success and tools to deploy AI that we have here. But I'm curious to hear from you what you think might be missing from the Canadian kind of AI healthcare ecosystem right now that would be needed to be able to more fully explore and act on opportunities to use machine learning and AI more broadly in healthcare innovation.
Frédéric, did you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
You can start.
That's a great question. And I think so I talked about brain trust, I talked about government support, no shortage of academics and scholars in this area. But I think that, the gaps are in, first off, I think a lot of the startups would tell us, and, we started to send out a survey to startups and some of the community stakeholders in the community of, what's missing and what is, and one of the number one things that comes up is access to data for startups. So open source data sets or access to data would probably be, I think it's number one on the list. I always talk about that first mile is very hard, or first kilometer in Canada. And that piece is really hard. So they would say, that piece is really hard. Right. And the second component would probably be the ability to scale. And a lot of that has to do with things like cybersecurity, and we're entering a new phase. There's a lot of activity going on in cybersecurity in Canada, which was probably non-existent, maybe even just 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So, making sure we've got security. So we've got to have access to, we have to have security. And then we have to have access. In many cases, what we're hearing is startups are developing really cool technology, but when we go back to the clinician, or, in some cases we work with the Canadian Association of Radiologists, they tell us, well, that's cool technology, but we would never use it. Wouldn't be useful to us. So validated problem sets. So data, validated problem sets, and kind of, I think that's what we're trying to do with Accelerator at a very, small level, is try to get all of those groups together to say, how can we work at this at scale, and how do we make sure that what's being developed is validated? And I guess the last piece would be the ability to procure these tools around, subscription models like SaaS models. A lot of the procurement laws in Canada are not fine-tuned or tailored to support that. So how do we look at, how do we work from, pilot to procurement models and things like that we can actually, work with stakeholders and get this in the hands of the clinicians that want it. Sorry, that was a huge long answer to your question, but hopefully that helps.
That was very good. Thank you very much, Daniel. Frédéric, do you want to comment?
Maybe I can try one or two things. First, probably it could be useful for us to have some kind of, and I think it's evolving, but some kind of guidelines, fast track, and how to get data in some kind of a legal, compliant way. But this is evolving. Also, since we kind of better understand the machine learning potential, we see the end and the beginning at the same time, and we realize, yes, we maybe not have the data, but sometimes there is a really great opportunity, and this data doesn't exist yet. In the example I presented, Absence will really need to produce this data with the fusion of pressure and images, and that would be one of the deliverable that is interesting in our project.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? I do have another question. And again, I think you touched a little bit upon that, but you know, to execute your R&D strategy, I think you need to have a, you know, and I do understand it's still at a very early stage, but ultimately you will have an effective, you will need to have an effective AI team with the right skills and talent. And given the current competitive market and increased demand on AI experts, how do you find and attract individuals with the required AI skills? I think it's a common kind of challenge across the industry. So would appreciate hearing your insights on that.
Wow, that's a really challenging question. I guess we just entered the field of motivation and human resources, but I guess you need, UPSAS is very good in this field. I think you need to, because those people that like AI, they are passionate and they want to use this superpower, and that you must you must enable that. So there are opportunities, and you need to be able to apply that. But it's not enough. Even with a good environment, we are not enough to complete all those great ideas. So we do collaborate, and I guess this is just like in friendship, you need to, how do you say, cultivate this relationship with, so we are working with LTI, and we're working with CIMI and with many universities and hospital centers. So we need to maintain that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, agreed. I would say it's really, there's a lot of competition, but there's also, if we can get a strong ecosystem. And so one of the things would be, you know, the large scale vendors like GE, but, you know, just to give you an example, we're on a supercluster project where there's Philips and Konica Minolta, right? And so there is the ability to, you know, to work together. It's just, we need to find ways to do that. And I think, you know, from our viewpoint, it's better, I think, for healthcare, and going back to the patient, that's better, right? The patient wants a whole ecosystem that's working together, as opposed to competitors working against each other, because you slow the scale of innovation when you're trying to work against each other, or you know, keep things secret. And we know that's going to take a long time to develop and deploy these. So I think Canada is one of the best countries from what I can see in terms of that ecosystem. But what I see is it needs a bit more organization, and and there are programs that are trying to organize it. So
absolutely. Thank you very much, Daniel and Frédéric, for your answers. That was very useful. I don't see any other questions from attendees.
I may have a question. Allow me to ask.
Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead, Jen.
Sure. Thank you so much. So this is perhaps addressed to Frédéric Coué. You may have touched upon this during your presentation, and I will certainly go back and revisit your presentation in the video. But may I ask, how do you go ahead and go about measuring success? Like, do you have certain KPIs to measure the success of your work? Is it perhaps the success of a specific heart procedure, or is it reduced patient mortality rates at large? Or this may be equally a very broad question, but if you can shed some insight on success metrics. Thank you.
Another tough question. So basically there are, I guess, 3 levels of success. So we have our algorithms, we have our requirements, and then the impact, the medical impact. So, and obviously this will not be managed by the same team. So that needs communication. If I take, for example, the co-registration example. So technically we have a small block that needs to track the tip. So we will kind of work on our loss function and minimize our metric. And in this particular example, this is very simple. We need to minimize the distance between our prediction and the true value. But then our product has some requirements that would be basically pass or fail, or so we really need to have to reach a certain degree of precision, which would be in the range of 1 or 2 millimeter, for that product to be useful for the doctors. And finally, there is this estimation of the impact it will have on the market and on the patients. And that comes from a different team at Absence.
Okay, merci. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
And maybe I can jump in. I'm Philippe Gagnon, R&D director at Absence. I mean, like Dan said earlier, it's all about the patients. And what we want to do ultimately is offer better tools to cardiologists, so they make better decisions, they provide better treatment, and in the end, this is how we measure our success. If we're able to to deliver better products to the industry, and so if the medical teams provide better care, then that's it. We did succeed. So that's really the goal. And to go back to the previous question about having the right people and the right resources and all. I'm a lucky guy. I have Frédéric with me, who's very passionate, and we need this kind of people, passionate people that like what they do. So we try to to get those people in house and make them work on the right projects and keep them motivated. The other thing also is we are very open to welcoming people that have no AI training, and we train them. So this is something to look into as well, because it may be hard to have people with lots of experience and you want them to be perfect when they come in. But as a manager, I always say 50% of the interview is culture fit. Does that person fit in your team? If that person fits in your team because of common values and stuff like that, then you're close to a hiring. The rest of it is training and learning the stuff through the projects and everything else. So we need to be flexible, that's for sure, in the current market. Very flexible, but it's possible.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Philippe. That was a great addition, and thank you for stepping in and providing your insights. I do apologize. The last question was coming from Farida. I thought it was coming from Jen. So sorry about that. Jen, you still have a question?
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I think, Frédéric, sorry for butchering the pronunciation, but I think you mentioned earlier about good machine learning practices being something the regulators are more and more interested in. Data scientists, machine learning engineers, they're not really usually found in medical device. They're kind of new to the industry. Have you found it challenging to sort of detail the design of your machine learning models when describing them for the design history file? Like it's a road less traveled, I think, probably, right?
We're talking deployment on medical device, like the inferencing. Is that what the question is about?
No, for technical submissions. So when you're submitting it to the FDA.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so the pneumothorax model I talked about earlier was submitted to Health Canada and FDA, and it's on a device and it's on PACS. So it's a unique situation. And a lot of the regulatory are starting to, they're starting to look at algorithm as a medical device is how they're kind of classifying it. And that's how they put it in which classification it is. We do find FDA and the regulatory body in Europe is actually a little bit further ahead than Health Canada. So, Health Canada is catching up, but they do have a digital advisory board community that's actually helping them shape, the guidance for some of these algorithms. So, to answer your question, yeah, it's a big challenge. How do we shape that? And in many cases, I think we're kind of learning what what things they're asking for us, but they're starting to look at, from FDA and the European regulatory. It's really interesting. They're starting to ask questions like, how well does this work for gender? How well does it work for age groups? How does the algorithm, how does it update? How does it, is there continuous learning? So there's some really good questions, and it just shows you that these regulatory bodies are really thinking about how these algorithms work and the benefits. But I think they are challenged with. We did a submission. There's a submission happening at the FDA in the US, for example, and it's 100 algorithms for a chest suite. So the FDA just said, "Whoa, how do we deal with this? We're going to have to look at batches of that one chest suite in groups." So lots of challenges, but I think we're making good progress in terms of their understanding and how we proceed with these. And I think we're going to grow. I'm starting to see a growth in terms of the number of algorithms being developed and submitted to regulatory.
Thank you very much, Danielle and Frédéric. That was an excellent session today. Thanks to our attendees as well for joining. Once again, if these events are of interest to you, please do not forget to subscribe to our e-newsletter through our website, innovate.ca. Once again, thank you, everyone, and please have a good rest of your day. We'll see you next month.